Sometimes the ocean keeps secrets, secrets that were never meant to be found. What really happened to the Japanese submarine I-52 carrying tons of gold across the Atlantic? Why did a mysterious signal echo from the depths decades after it sank? And what does the sea itself want to tell us? The answers aren't easy, and they're not what you expect. But if you stay with us until the end of this video, you'll hear the story no one dared to tell. So dive in and see what the ocean remembers. The night was thick, the kind of darkness that swallowed even the stars. The air in Singapore's harbor was heavy with fuel and salt, and the faint hum of diesel engines echoed like a heartbeat beneath the surface of the waves. It was July 1944. Japan was bleeding on every front. The empire that once roared across the Pacific was now cornered, hunted, and desperate. At Pier 17, under the cloak of secrecy, a steel monster waited. I-52. A Type C-3 cargo submarine, long, lean, and silent. She wasn't built for battle. She was built for one thing, survival. And tonight, her crew was about to vanish into the blackest ocean on Earth. Captain Uno Cameo stood on the deck, the glow of his cigarette barely visible through the mist. He didn't smoke out of habit, only when his mind refused to stay quiet. And tonight, it screamed. He looked down at the dock where crates marked machinery parts were being loaded by hand, but he knew better. Inside those crates lay nearly 2 tons of gold bullion, sealed in wax and lead, bound for Nazi Germany, payment for technology, radar systems, and jet engines that Japan desperately needed. Uno took one last look at the faces of his men, 40 sailors, 2 engineers, and a German liaison officer sent to guide them through the Atlantic. Every man wore the same expression, a mix of pride, fear, and something deeper, a quiet knowing that they might never see the sunrise again. The sea was calm that night, almost too calm. The kind of stillness that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. When the final crate disappeared below deck, Uno gave the order. All hands, prepare to submerge once we're clear of the bay. The engines rumbled to life. A deep metallic growl rolled across the water. Men on the dock raised their arms in silent salute as the submarine slipped away, swallowed by the shadows of the harbor. There were no cheers, no music, no farewell flags. Just the faint hiss of the sea against steel, and the quiet understanding that this mission was classified beyond death. Inside the sub, the air was already thick and hot. The corridors narrow, the metal sweating from humidity. Ensign Taro Matsuda, the youngest of the crew, ran his hand along the cold wall and whispered, "Feels like the belly of a beast." Chief Engineer Sato laughed softly. Then pray the beast doesn't wake up before Berlin. But deep down, none of them believed they'd make it that far. They'd heard stories about American sonar buoys dropped from planes, about the mad angels of the Atlantic, destroyers that hunted anything that moved beneath the surface. And now the hunters' eyes were turned east. In the control room, the radio operator adjusted the dials, his fingers trembling slightly. The codebooks beside him were bound in black leather, their corners worn and greasy. Every page was a secret, and every secret could mean life or death. Then a faint click, a whisper through static, an encoded signal. Not from Japan, but from Berlin. Uno leaned over his shoulder. "Read it." The operator swallowed hard. "Message received, Captain. Weather clear over Biscay. Rendezvous with U-530 confirmed." Uno nodded, but his expression didn't change. A meeting with a German U-boat in the middle of the Atlantic. That was the plan. But between Singapore and that rendezvous lay 10,000 miles of ocean and 1,000 ways to die. As the submarine pushed further into open waters, the last lights of Singapore faded behind them. Uno opened his logbook and wrote quietly, July 22nd, 1944, departed Singapore, cargo secure, spirits high, we sail for Germany, though the sea may not forgive us. He closed the book, exhaled, and whispered to himself, the ocean remembers everything, and somewhere deep below, as if the sea heard him, a low, distant echo answered back. The first dawn at sea always felt different. It wasn't light that woke the crew. It was the hum, a deep vibration that came from somewhere inside the hull, like the submarine had its own heartbeat. Steel, salt, and men all trapped together, breathing the same recycled air. Down in the mess hall, someone was boiling rice. The smell fought against the diesel and sweat. Voices were low, tired, the kind of silence that happens when everyone's pretending they're not scared. Petty Officer Tanaka was sharpening a knife. Slow, rhythmic strokes. He'd been on submarines since '41. He knew the sea didn't forgive mistakes. 5,000 meters under, he muttered. And she'll crush you like paper, young Matsuda laughed nervously. That's encouraging, Tanaka-san. The older man looked up, eyes hollow. Encouragement won't keep you breathing, boy. Discipline will. By noon, the tropical sun had turned the metal inside the sub into an oven. Fans buzzed, pushing warm air in circles. The sound was constant, the kind that eats into your nerves. Somewhere, a screw rattled against a panel, tapping endlessly like a ticking clock. Captain Uno watched everything, every face, every gesture. He wasn't a man who raised his voice, but silence followed him like a shadow. He carried the weight of 40 souls and 2 tons of gold. He walked into the radio room where the operator was sweating over his headphones. Any word from headquarters? The operator shook his head. Only routine signals, Captain. But there's something odd. Uno raised an eyebrow. Odd? Static. A lot of it. Like echoes. Uno stared at the frequency meter. He'd heard that kind of interference before when a ship nearby was scanning. Could be weather, he said finally, though his voice didn't sound convinced. The operator nodded, pretending to believe him. That night, when the crew switched to silent running mode, the world outside disappeared. No lights, no talking, no music. Just the creak of the hull as water pressure increased, and the faint, rhythmic ping from the sonar, their only voice in the dark. Ping, silence, ping, silence. Each pulse meant the same thing. We're here. Are you? At 2300 hours, Uno sat in his small cabin, flipping through coded papers. The German liaison officer, Oberleutnant Weber, entered quietly. He was tall, blonde, and always smelled faintly of tobacco and oil. Uno respected him, but didn't trust him. Captain, Weber began, our rendezvous coordinates have changed. Berlin sent an update earlier today. We must adjust course north by 50 miles. When? Immediately. Uno frowned. Berlin doesn't change plans without reason. Weber lit a cigarette. Reason or not, orders are orders. The U-530 will expect us. The flame flickered, reflecting off the cabin walls. For a brief moment, Uno caught sight of Weber's eyes, cold, mechanical, like a man who'd already accepted death as an ally. At midnight, the I-52 rose briefly to periscope depth. The sea was black, still, endless. Uno adjusted the periscope and took a slow scan. Far in the distance, lightning flickered behind clouds. Silent, haunting. He looked down at the waves, at the reflection of his own face. It looked like a ghost staring back. North by 50 miles, he whispered. Then softly, let's hope Germany's still there when we arrive. Down below, the engine crew kept working through the heat. Oil on their hands, sweat dripping from their foreheads, shirts sticking to their backs. Chief Engineer Sato wiped his face with a rag and sighed. Every mile feels heavier, he said to Matsuda. You ever think about the gold? Matsuda asked. Gold doesn't shine down here, Sato replied. Down here, it's just weight. By the third night, the ocean began to change. The air grew colder, and the stars came out like 1,000 silent witnesses. Uno stood at the observation scope, his face lit only by red lamps inside the control room. The navigator whispered, "Entering deeper waters, sir." Uno nodded. From now on, he said, we trust the ocean. And as the submarine slipped deeper, the surface world, the war, the sun, even hope itself, started to fade away. By the time they reached the open Indian Ocean, the sky had turned into an endless gray sheet. Winds rolled low, heavy with rain, and the sea looked like polished iron under the clouds. For the men of I-52, every wave felt like a reminder. The world above was dying, and the one below was waiting for them. Inside the sub, the red lamps flickered, painting their faces like ghosts. The air was thick and smelled of oil, metal, and nerves. No one spoke much anymore. The novelty of adventure had faded, replaced by that slow, creeping fear only submariners know, the fear of silence that's too deep. Around midnight, the radio operator, Ensign Hirose, leaned closer to his console. His headphones crackled softly with static, and then a pulse, short, sharp, repeating. Click, click, click. He frowned, adjusted the frequency. The signal wasn't Morse, it wasn't Japanese, and it wasn't natural. He turned toward Captain Uno. Sir, you might want to hear this. Uno stepped closer, eyes narrowing. What frequency? 31.2. It started 5 minutes ago. It's come. Uno grabbed the spare headset. For a moment, all he heard was static. Then, that sound again. Click, 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 click. Rhythmic, measured, like something searching. He pulled the headset off, cut power to the transmitter. I want radio silence. The crew obeyed instantly. The hum of the systems died, replaced by the groan of metal under pressure. Uno stood there for a while, listening to the submarine breathe. He didn't say it out loud, but every man in that room understood. Someone was listening. At 0300 hours, Weber entered, holding a small map under his arm. What's going on, Captain? We might have been detected. Weber raised an eyebrow. Impossible. We're too far east for Allied patrols. Uno didn't answer. He just stared at the sonar screen. That slow, sweeping line tracing the darkness like a blind man's finger. Then there it was. A faint echo. A return signal. The operator looked up, pale. Contact. Bearing 215. Could be a buoy or aircraft sonar. Uno clenched his jaw. Depth 60 meters. Maintain silent running. No noise, no movement. The order rippled through the sub like a chill wind. Engines dimmed, lights turned red, and every sound became a sin. They waited. Minutes felt like hours. The hull creaked. A drop of condensation slid down the steel and hit the floor. Plink. Even that sound made a few men flinch. Matsuda whispered, "What if it's one of theirs?" Tanaka hissed, "Then we pray they pass." Above them, unseen, something was moving. Maybe a plane, maybe a destroyer. They couldn't tell, but the ocean carried vibrations, a low, distant hum that came and went, like thunder that refused to die. Uno checked his watch. 5 minutes, 10, 15. The echo slowly faded. He nodded to the operator. "Resume course. Slow speed. No transmissions for 24 hours." When the engines came back on, the submarine seemed to sigh in relief. Men unclenched their fists, stretched their legs, tried to act normal again. But the fear stayed. It clung to the walls, to their lungs, to the silence between their words. Uno sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "They're out there," he murmured. Weber looked up from his notes. "Who?" "The Americans." He stared at the map. The endless ocean sprawled before them like a graveyard, and they've learned how to listen. By dawn, the sea had calmed again, flat, silver, and deceptively peaceful. Some of the men climbed up to the conning tower for fresh air. The horizon stretched forever. No ships, no smoke, no sign of life. But as Matsuda looked out over the waves, he swore he saw something. A tiny black dot, far to the west, rising and falling with the swells. He blinked, and it was gone. That night, the I-52 dived again. The crew moved in silence, each man pretending he hadn't seen anything unusual. But deep down, they all felt it. The ocean wasn't empty anymore. Something was watching and waiting. And for the first time, Captain Uno wrote nothing in his logbook that night. Just a blank page, because sometimes words only make the silence louder. By the 5th day at sea, the men of I-52 had already forgotten what fresh air smelled like. The submarine had become its own world. A steel coffin drifting through black water. Every breath was heavy with diesel and sweat. Every sound mattered. They had crossed into the western Indian Ocean now, the open stretch between the Maldives and the Arabian Sea. To most sailors, it was nothing but empty blue. To submariners, it was a graveyard. Dozens of ships had disappeared here. Some blamed storms. Others, American patrols. Captain Uno was in the control room, eyes on the navigation charts. The compass needle twitched slightly. Not much, but enough to make him frown. "Magnetic interference," Weber said behind him. Uno didn't reply. He knew interference could mean one of two things: solar activity or nearby equipment. He ordered a depth change, 70 meters, then turned to his sonar officer. "Run a scan. Slow pulse. Ping. Silence. Ping." The sound rippled through the water by bouncing back faint echoes, and then a blip. Small. Distant. Moving. The sonar man whispered, "Bearing 180. Could be debris." Uno leaned closer. "Or it could be company." For the next hour, the submarine glided quietly, the crew barely breathing. The hull creaked like old bones. In the radio room, Hirose listened to static that seemed to whisper in patterns. It was almost human. Then suddenly, the tone shifted. Short bursts, measured and sharp. He froze. It was Morse code, but not Japanese. He wrote the symbols down quickly. D-E-D-E. Uno entered the room. "What is it?" "Repeating sequence, Captain. It's the U.S. Navy call-up signal." Uno's stomach dropped. They were no longer invisible. "Silent running," he barked. The order echoed through the submarine, engines down, lights off. Even the fans slowed to a whisper. The men moved carefully, every footstep measured. One wrong clang could mean death. Up above, they could hear faint thuds, distant, rhythmic, and growing louder. It wasn't thunder. It was propellers. Aircraft. Inside the sub, time stopped. Uno stood at the periscope, watching the shadowed surface through the murky water. The ocean shimmered, reflecting flashes of light. Flares. Searchlights. They were scanning the sea, looking for something or someone. Tanaka gritted his teeth. "They found us." Uno shook his head. "Not yet. They're guessing." The sonar pinged again, louder this time. The men winced as the metallic echo filled the hull. "They dropped sonar buoys," Weber said quietly. "Passive, active. They'll listen for us." Uno stared at him, voice low. "Then we'll give them nothing to hear." The submarine drifted silently, like a ghost. No engines, no motion. Just the slow heartbeat of the deep. Minutes became hours. The air grew stale, suffocating. Sweat dripped down faces onto metal, into silence. Matsuda's lips trembled. "How long can we stay like this?" Sato whispered, "As long as it takes to stay alive." Then, a distant boom. A muffled shockwave rolled through the water. A depth charge. Uno gripped the periscope rail as the sound faded. "They're testing. They don't know exactly where we are." Another explosion. Closer. The lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the gauges cracked. The crew waited for the next one, but it didn't come. Only silence. The kind that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. At 400 hours, the sonar went dead. No pings, no echoes, just static. Uno exhaled slowly. "They're gone. Resume power. Course northwest." Engines rumbled back to life, weak at first, like lungs filling with air after drowning. The men moved carefully, half expecting another explosion, but the ocean stayed quiet. Weber approached Uno. You see now, Captain? The Allies control the skies, even out here. Uno nodded, eyes fixed ahead. The sky belongs to them, he said quietly, but the deep still belongs to us. Weber smiled faintly. Let's hope the deep agrees. Far above, the last American patrol plane circled once more before heading back west. The ocean below looked calm, endless, harmless. They never saw the faint glimmer of steel sliding quietly beneath the waves, carrying men and gold deeper into a sea that no longer promised mercy. By the time the sun rose on their 10th day at sea, the Indian Ocean was nothing but gray. No color, no birds. Just fog, a wide, endless shroud rolling over the waves like smoke. The men called it the Dead Sea. Not because it killed them, but because it made them forget they were alive. Captain Uno sat alone in his small cabin, his hands resting on the rough leather of his logbook. The pages were already stained with salt and oil, the ink bleeding into the paper. He wrote slowly, his pen scratching in rhythm with the hum of the engines. June 12th, 1944, 2300 hours. The sea is silent tonight. The crew is holding steady, though exhaustion has its own gravity. We've escaped detection, for now. But the ocean is changing. It listens. He paused, staring at that last word. It listens. Why had he written that? A knock on the door. Captain, permission to enter? It was Hiroses, the radio operator, the youngest man aboard. Barely 20. Uno nodded. Sir, we've picked up another signal. It's faint, but it's Japanese, I think. Coordinates? Somewhere west, near the equator. Could be a relay from Berlin. Uno took the logbook and slipped it into his desk. Very well. Keep monitoring. And Hirose, yes, Captain? Don't tell the men yet. They need sleep, not ghosts. The night deepened. The engines droned softly, and outside the portholes the sea was darker than ink. Matsuda stood at the periscope, half dreaming, half listening to the low hum of machinery. He thought about home, his mother's garden, the sound of cicadas, the smell of rain on dirt. Then, through the faint static of the comms, he heard something. Not radio chatter, not Morse code, something else. A hum, deep, rhythmic, mechanical, but not theirs. He froze. Captain, sonar contact. Uno rushed to the control room. Bearing? 275, slow, steady, could be a merchant ship. But Weber frowned, eyes narrowing at the scope. No, not merchant. That's a convoy pattern, 3 escorts, maybe a carrier. Uno felt his stomach twist. We stay silent. Dive to 100 meters. The lights dimmed. The sub tilted down, sinking slowly into the black. Hours passed. No explosions, no sonar, only the whisper of water sliding past the hull. Then, a sound, soft at first, like a metallic heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. The men looked around. Weber's eyes widened. That's not theirs. Uno frowned. What do you mean? It's echoing inside the hull, not from outside. The captain's face went pale. He looked around the room. Every man was silent, listening. And the sound came again. Thump, thump. From deep within the submarine. From somewhere. Below them. Uno whispered, engine room, report. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He turned to Tanaka. Go check. The officer disappeared down the narrow passageway, flashlight in hand. The beam flickered through pipes and cables, reflecting on wet steel. Then he reached the lower deck, where the sound was loudest. The flashlight caught something dripping from a vent. Dark, thick, and red. Tanaka's voice trembled through the comm. Captain, need to see this. Uno came running, Weber behind him. They stopped at the hatch to the engine room. The door was sealed shut, bolted from the inside. Uno pounded on it. Open up! This is the captain. No reply. Only that same sound. Thump, 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 coming from behind the steel. Weber stared at the door, whispering, what if it's not the engine that's making the noise? Uno turned to him sharply. Don't start with superstition, Lieutenant. But deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. He returned to his cabin an hour later. The sound had stopped. The men were shaken but silent. He opened his logbook again. The ink had smudged from earlier, but between the lines a drop of something dark had stained the paper. He lifted it close to the lamplight. Not ink, blood. He closed the book slowly. The sea listens, he whispered again, and sometimes it answers. That was the last entry of June 12th. The next page would remain blank, because by the next morning the I-52 would cross into what Allied charts called the zone of silence, and only one signal would ever be heard from her again. A final, broken Morse code message. DEI-52 under attack, cargo secure, sinking. Then, nothing. The ocean stretched out like a sheet of black glass. No moon, no stars, just the endless dark, breathing slow and deep. At 2200 hours, the USS Bogue Carrier Group was slicing through that darkness, escorted by destroyers, Francis M. Robinson and Jansen. Inside the operations room, the air buzzed with quiet tension. Radar screens flickered, men muttered into headsets, and the soft hum of machinery filled the space. Lieutenant? Sir? Run another sweep. The radar spun, once, twice, and then it caught something, just a flicker, a pulse. At first they thought it was a whale, then the signal repeated. Low, steady, metallic. Submarine signature. On board the I-52, Captain Uno's world was shrinking. The oxygen was thinning again. The air smelled of oil, fear, and something else, something metallic, sharp, almost like lightning trapped inside the hull. They'd been submerged for 12 hours straight, hiding from what they believed were merchant ships. But now the instruments told a different story. Captain, Weber said quietly, surface radar sweep detected to the northwest, multiple contacts. Uno didn't answer right away. He knew what that meant. They weren't ships, they were hunters. At 23:30 hours, the Bogue launched 2 Avenger aircraft. Each carried radar pods and Mark 24 Fido acoustic torpedoes, weapons designed for one purpose only: to chase sound. The pilots flew low, skimming over the sea, their instruments glowing pale green in the cockpit darkness. One of them, Ensign Robert Goodwin, broke the silence. This is Avenger 1, getting faint contact bearing 190, possible sub at 70 meters, marking coordinates. The voice over the radio crackled. Copy that, Avenger 1. Proceed with caution. Confirm before attack. Goodwin smirked. Don't worry, Command. We'll find your ghost. Inside the I-52, sonar picked up a faint drumming above them. Whump, whump, whump. Aircraft. The men froze. Uno turned to Hirose. Cut all power, batteries only, silent running. The engines went quiet. The lights dimmed to a blood red. The crew became shadows. Moving, breathing, praying. Weber whispered, if they drop sonar buoys again, we're finished. Uno gave no reply. His hands were steady, but his eyes weren't. He'd been at sea long enough to know when the ocean turned against you. Above the waves, the Avengers dropped their buoys, small metal cylinders hitting the water one after another, sending out pings like heartbeat pulses. Ping, pause, ping. Each one cutting through the deep, searching for the sound of men hiding in steel. Inside the I-52, Hirose's headset began to buzz. Tiny clicks and echoes dancing across the frequency. He scribbled notes, trying to decode them, until he realized it wasn't random. The pings were in rhythm, almost like Morse. He froze. Captain, the sonar signals. They're not just scanning us. What do you mean? They're sending a message. Uno frowned. A message to whom? Hirose hesitated. To us, sir. The bridge went silent. Every man stared at the radio operator. Say that again, Uno said. They're using the sonar pulses. Short, long, short. It's code. I'm sure of it. Decode it. It says, we see you. The captain's blood ran cold. No one moved. Then, from above, a splash, followed by a low, distant rumble, and then the sound everyone feared, Fido in the water. Uno grabbed the intercom. All hands! Evasive maneuvers, hard to port, down angle 10 degrees. The submarine tilted sharply. Pipes groaned, bolts screeched, and water sloshed across the deck. The men held on to whatever they could. The sound of the torpedo grew louder, like a heartbeat chasing theirs. Weber shouted over the chaos, it's tracking our propellers. It hears us. Uno barked back, kill the motors. Let it lose the trail. Silence again. Only the ticking of depth gauges. 30 meters, 50, 90. Then a flash of light, a roar, and the world turned upside down. The torpedo exploded close. Not a direct hit, but close enough to tear through the aft compartments. Water flooded in. Steam hissed. Men screamed. Uno was thrown against a console, blood streaking down his face. He shouted through the smoke, seal the compartments, now! Weber and Tanaka fought to close the hatch as freezing water surged in. The sound was deafening, metal shrieking, air rushing out, the ocean claiming its price. But then, silence again. The torpedo was gone. The sea waited. Uno coughed, his voice hoarse. Damage report. Weber answered between gasps. Engine room flooded. Starboard ballast tank breached. We're losing depth control. Stabilize, blow ballast, slowly. The submarine shuddered, groaning as compressed air forced the water out. They leveled at 120 meters, barely alive. Uno leaned on the console, eyes half closed. We're not getting out of this one easy. Weber gave a bitter laugh. Didn't think the ocean would let us, sir. And then, through the static, the radio crackled again. Not Allied chatter, not their own signal, just one faint, repeating message. DE-52. Uno froze. That's our call sign, Hirose whispered, trembling. But I'm not transmitting, sir. Uno stared at the radio, and for the first time since leaving Singapore, he felt something he couldn't name. Fear. Water was pouring in faster than the pumps could fight it. The crew scrambled through the narrow corridors, slipping on oil and seawater, dragging the wounded toward higher decks. Every clang of metal echoed like a scream. Uno's voice roared through the chaos. Seal the lower bulkheads. Get the wounded to middeck. Tanaka and Hirose worked shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms soaked, their faces black with smoke. Behind them, the sound of the sea was no longer distant. It was inside the submarine, a constant roar that made the walls tremble. Above, the two Avengers circled again. The pilots saw the oil slick spreading wide across the water. Goodwin tapped his radio. "Command, this is Avenger 1. We have visual confirmation of oil and debris. Possible sub-hit. Requesting permission to deploy secondary ordnance." The voice from Bogue came back, calm but cold. "Permission granted. Drop zone 315. Make sure she doesn't come back up." Goodwin glanced at his co-pilot. "Let's finish it." They armed the second Fido and let it fall. It slipped beneath the waves. Silent, patient, hungry. Down below, the I-52's lights flickered. Weber was shouting at the engineers. "We've lost the aft batteries. Try rerouting power through number 2 conduit." Uno turned to Hirose. "Radio. Get me Tokyo. Now." Hirose hesitated. "Sir, if I transmit, they'll hear us. The torpedo. Do it anyway. This crew deserves to be heard." He nodded and powered up the transmitter. Static filled the room, thick, chaotic, almost violent. He tuned the dial, fighting to find a clear line through the storm of frequencies. Then he began to tap. D52. Under attack. Depth 120. Cargo secure. Sinking. Before he could finish, a blast threw him backward. The second torpedo had hit. The submarine lurched violently. Lights went black. Pipes exploded, spraying steam. The hull groaned as metal twisted under pressure. Men screamed, prayed, some just stared in silence as the sea began to swallow their ship. Uno tried to stand, but his leg was pinned under debris. Weber pulled at it, shouting over the noise. "Captain, we have to go! Forward escape hatch is still open." "No," Uno shouted. "Get the men out first!" Weber didn't argue. He turned and pushed through the flooding corridor, helping two sailors toward the hatch. Every step was slower than the last. The water was up to their chests now. On the surface, the Avengers banked hard, circling the widening slick. Goodwin looked down and exhaled. "That's it. She's gone." The co-pilot nodded. One more ghost in the deep. They turned for home, never seeing the faint shimmer of gold that glinted once beneath the waves, the sealed crates the I-52 had carried, the treasure the ocean would never give back. Below, the sub was dying. Uno pulled himself free, limping toward the radio room. Hirose was slumped against the console, blood running from his forehead. The radio still hissed faintly, a ghost signal caught between worlds. Uno pressed the key one last time. "Tell them, we tried." The transmission went nowhere. The sea took the words before they reached the surface. Water surged in through the cracks. The floor split. The lights dimmed to nothing. Uno stood at the center of the control room, listening to the creak of steel and the rush of water, the sound of the end. He reached for his logbook, the one he'd written every night since leaving Singapore. The ink was smeared now, the pages soaked. He wrote just one line more. "The ocean does not forgive, but it remembers." Then the book slipped from his hand and floated upward as the submarine sank into darkness. At 0:48 hours, sonar from Francis M. Robinson recorded the final noise. A long metallic groan, then silence. The sea closed over I-52, burying 55 men and 2 tons of gold beneath nearly 17,000 feet of black water. No survivors, no witnesses, just whispers carried by the current. And somewhere, deep below the surface, a weak, broken signal pulsed through the static, the same one the American operators logged that night, DEI-52. No one ever found where it came from. Maybe it was a glitch, maybe an echo, or maybe the ocean wasn't done speaking. The war was still raging across the Pacific, but for the men aboard the USS Bogue, the ocean had gone strangely quiet. It had been 4 days since they destroyed the Japanese sub. 4 days of silence. 4 days of gray horizons and restless sleep. Unsigned Goodwin sat in the radar room, headphones hanging loosely around his neck, eyes half open as he stared at the green glow of the scope. He'd been replaying that night over and over in his head. The explosions, the oil fire, the black water swallowing everything. He'd convinced himself it was over, until the signal came. It was faint, almost nothing at all, just a rhythmic pulse buried deep in static. Goodwin frowned, leaning closer. That can't be right. He turned the dial, adjusted the gain. The pulse came again. Low, slow, familiar, DEI-52. Goodwin froze. His blood turned to ice. "No way, that's impossible." He ripped off his headphones and shouted, "Lieutenant, sir, you need to hear this." Lieutenant Harris, the ship's communications officer, walked in, half irritated. "What is it this time, Goodwin? Another damn echo?" "No, sir. It's the same frequency as the sub we sank. It's calling its own name." Harris frowned. "The I-52? You're telling me you're picking up their signal?" "Yes, sir. Morse code, repeating, same call sign." Harris leaned over the console, listening through the static. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke softly. "Could be a reflection, a ghost signal bouncing off the thermocline." "But, sir," Goodwin whispered, "it's too clear." They recorded the transmission. For the next 6 hours, the same message repeated. DEI-52, DEI-52. Then at dawn, it stopped. The sea went quiet again. Too quiet. Goodwin sat there, staring at the silent console. Sir, do you think anyone could still be alive down there? Harris shook his head. 17,000 feet? No one's alive at that depth, son. He paused. But sometimes the ocean plays tricks. That night, the Bogue continued her patrol westward, but not a man on board could sleep. The crew whispered about the ghost signal, how the sea had spoken their enemy's name, how even the static seemed to carry whispers in Japanese. One sailor swore he heard tapping on the hull during his watch. Another claimed the sonar picked up a metallic heartbeat at 2 hours. Harris dismissed it as nerves, but deep down, even he felt it. A pressure in the air, like the ocean was holding its breath. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's intelligence center received a fragmented transmission. It was weak, broken, distorted, but one part was unmistakable. DEI-52, under attack, sinking. The message had traveled across the world, through layers of sea and sky, reaching home long after its sender had drowned. The Japanese operators stared at the paper strip as the printer spat out the last dots and dashes. One of them whispered, "She made it. She really called us." No one spoke for a while. They all knew what it meant. The gold was gone. The men were gone. But the ocean was still talking. Back aboard Bogue, Goodwin couldn't shake the feeling that something was listening back. He kept hearing faint clicks in his headphones, as if someone or something was still tapping from below. At 0300 hours, he wrote a note in his log. Signal returned briefly. Same pattern. I don't think it's reflection. I think it's a reply. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did the sea. The next morning, the sound room was packed. 3 officers, 2 sonar technicians, and 1 scientist, all staring at the same reel of magnetic tape. The recording from the night before. The one labeled I-52 signal. Lieutenant Harris rolled the tape, and the room filled with the crackle of static, white noise, hissing like wind through iron. Then it came. The pulse. Soft, low, steady. D-52. The scientist, Dr. Merrill from the Naval Research Lab, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's too precise to be environmental. You're sure this came from the North Atlantic? Yes, sir, Harris said. Coordinates match the I-52 wreck site. Dr. Merrill rewound the tape. Play it again. He listened. Again and again. Then said something no one wanted to hear. It's not an echo. It's transmission. Someone or something is still signaling. That line hit the crew like a cold wave. The room went silent. You could almost hear hearts pounding beneath the hum of the tape machine. Goodwin, the radar tech, whispered, "But that's impossible. The sub's crushed, right?" "At that depth," Merrill replied. "Crushed, yes. But signals can travel in strange ways down there. Steel hulls can resonate. Energy trapped for years. Bouncing. Repeating." Harris frowned. "You mean the ocean is replaying the message?" Merrill gave a slow, grim nod. "A ghost in the deep." By nightfall, word had spread through the ship like wildfire. Men gathered near the sonar room, whispering about voices from below. Some said the signal was cursed, that every time it played, the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Others swore they heard something else in the recording. Not Morse. Whispers, like breathing between the static. Goodwin stayed up all night listening. He adjusted the filters, slowed the reel, boosted the low frequencies, and then, for a moment, he heard it. A faint human voice. Japanese. Just 2 words. "Tasukete kudasai. Help us." Goodwin's hands shook. He replayed it over and over, but every time, the voice got quieter until it vanished completely into the static. He rushed to find Harris. "Sir, you have to hear this. Someone's alive down there." "Goodwin, calm down. That's not possible." "No, listen. It's a voice. I swear to God." Harris grabbed the tape and listened. Nothing. Just static. "You need rest, Ensign." That's an order. But Goodwin couldn't rest. Not with that voice echoing in his mind, like the ocean itself had whispered it straight into his skull. 3 days later, the Bogue received orders to move south. But before they left the area, Dr. Merrill insisted on one last test. They dropped an experimental sonar buoy, a new model designed to send pings deep into the abyss and record reflections. For 20 minutes, the ocean answered with silence. Then the recorder picked something up. Not a return ping, but a reply. 3 sharp taps, perfectly spaced, like a hand knocking on metal from below. The room froze. Merrill stared at the speaker. That's impossible." The tapping came again, this time slower, and then a final long scrape, metal against metal, like something dragging itself across the seafloor, and then silence. That night, Goodwin stood alone on deck watching the dark horizon. The sea looked calm, but he knew better now. He knew it listened. He knew it remembered. And somewhere, 17,000 feet below, something or someone was still answering. Tokyo, July 1944. The city was restless, wrapped in the low hum of distant sirens. Inside a dimly lit office at the Imperial Navy Communications Bureau, Lieutenant Commander Hideo Tanaka leaned over a table filled with radio logs, wires, and empty teacups. He hadn't slept in 30 hours. War had a way of turning time into one endless night. A young operator burst through the door, holding a strip of coded Morse. "Commander, you need to see this." Tanaka took the strip, brow furrowing. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he read the sequence. DEI-52, DEI-52. Sinking. Coordinates. He froze. For a moment, the room felt weightless. "Repeat that," he said quietly. "Sir, we received it 3 times before the signal cut out. It came through a North Atlantic relay." Tanaka stared at the code. He knew what those letters meant. I-52, the submarine carrying 22,000 pounds of gold bound for Germany. His brother Akira was aboard her. Tanaka clenched his jaw, fighting the chill crawling up his neck. "Was the transmission confirmed?" "Yes, sir. But there's something else." The operator handed him a second strip of paper. The signal had returned 12 hours later. Same frequency. Same pattern, except for one chilling addition. DEI-52. Returning. Tanaka's eyes widened. "Returning? That's impossible. She's gone." The operator hesitated. "Sir, with respect, maybe it's a relay bounce. Or maybe," Tanaka whispered, "it's something else." Later that night, Tanaka sat alone in the comms room, headphones pressed tight against his ears. Static hissed, crackled, whispered. He adjusted the dial, letting the hum of the ocean fill his mind. And then he heard it. A faint rhythm beneath the static, like a heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, metallic. Tap, 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 tap. He closed his eyes. He could almost picture it, the sub deep below, pressure crushing the hull, darkness swallowing the light, and somewhere in that abyss, a crew still tapping, still trying. Tanaka spoke softly into the microphone. I-52, this is Tokyo Command. If you can hear us, respond. Silence. Then tap, tap, tap. The same pattern. Tanaka's breath caught in his throat. My God, they're answering. For the next week, the Bureau secretly monitored the signal. Every night, the same pattern returned. Always around 0300 hours. Always from the same coordinates, the North Atlantic, 17,000 feet deep. Some officers dismissed it as interference. Others whispered about restless spirits. But Tanaka, he started to believe the sea itself was trying to send something back. He began keeping a journal, each entry shorter than the last, each one written with shakier hands. July 10th, the signal came again. It's growing fainter. Sometimes I think I hear Akira's voice between the static. July 12th, the Admiral told me to drop the investigation. He said the dead should rest. But how can they rest when the ocean keeps calling their name? July 14th, tonight the signal said something new. It said, too deep. I can't tell if it was in English or Japanese. By the end of the week, Tanaka was a ghost himself. He barely spoke, barely ate, just listened, hour after hour, to that endless whisper of the sea. And then one night, the signal stopped. No static, no echo, just silence. Tanaka sat there staring into the nothingness and whispered to no one, "Brother, you can rest now." But deep down, he knew. The ocean never lets go. Tokyo 1949. The war was long over, but for Hideo Tanaka, it never really ended. The Imperial Navy was gone. The flags, the orders, the codebooks, all burned. But inside a tiny apartment overlooking the ruins of Yokosuka Harbor, Tanaka still kept his old headphones. And every night, he listened. Static. Always the static. Like the sea breathing through the wires. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. But Tanaka couldn't forget that sound, those faint taps from the deep. He'd recorded them on reels of magnetic tape before the war ended, and now he played them on repeat, hoping one day they'd say something new. One evening, a knock on his door broke the silence. A man in a gray American uniform stood there. Civilian liaison, naval attaché, the kind of man who smiled without warmth. "Commander Tanaka, I presume?" "Former commander," Tanaka corrected. The American smile didn't fade. "I heard you were an expert on long-range communications, and that you once tracked a lost submarine called the I-52. Tanaka's eyes narrowed. "That was a lifetime ago. Why do you ask?" "Because," the man said, pulling a folder from his briefcase, "we picked up a transmission 2 weeks ago, from the same coordinates. The folder contained photographs, sonar prints, radio transcripts, analysis reports." Tanaka's hands trembled as he read them. The pattern was identical. DEI-52, returning. He looked up. "You're certain this came from the Atlantic?" "Yes, about 400 miles off the Azores. Our submarines logged it as interference, but one of our analysts said the signal had a human cadence." Tanaka swallowed hard. "A human cadence?" He stared at the tape. "Do you have the recording?" The American handed him a small reel. "You tell us what you think, off the record." That night, Tanaka threaded the tape through his old machine, and the hiss filled the room. He closed his eyes. There it was. The same low pulse he'd heard 5 years earlier. Same rhythm, same heartbeat. He turned the dial slowly, filtering, isolating, amplifying, and then, beneath the static, a faint whisper. "Akira." Tanaka froze. The room seemed to tilt. He played it again, and again, every time, the same word. A name. His brother's name. He didn't sleep for 3 days. He replayed the tape until the reels warped. He compared frequencies, wavelengths, noise patterns, and every test said the same thing. The voice was real. But that wasn't possible. The I-52 was 17,000 feet down, crushed, silent, unless... Tanaka grabbed his notebook, writing in a frantic scrawl. Open quote, "The ocean is not dead. It remembers sound. It replays memory. Maybe the crew isn't speaking. Maybe the sea is." Close quote. Weeks later, Tanaka met the American again. What did you find?" Tanaka hesitated. "Tell me, Captain. Do you believe the ocean can think?" "What?" "Sound can travel through water for miles. Pressure can turn metal into resonance chambers. Maybe what we're hearing isn't life, it's memory." The American frowned. "That's not science." "Neither was the signal," Tanaka said quietly. When the American left, Tanaka went back to his desk. He turned on the tape once more, and this time he didn't hear the Morse code. He heard something else. A deep, rhythmic rumble, like thousands of voices layered together beneath the sea, a chorus of the dead. He whispered to himself, "They never stopped calling." And far below the Atlantic, where the I-52 lay entombed in darkness, something shifted. A panel creaked, a cable snapped loose, the sea had answered. Atlantic Ocean, 1952. Aboard the research vessel USS Trieste II, the waves hit like drums against the steel hull. The crew moved in silence, faces pale under red cabin lights. They were here for one reason, to find out if the sea could hear them back. At the center of the operation was Dr. Walter Hensley, a naval acoustics expert with a reputation for chasing impossible questions. Beside him sat a familiar face, Dr. Hideo Tanaka. Older now, quieter, but still haunted by that one sound. "You're sure this is the exact location?" Hensley asked. "Down to the last coordinate," Tanaka replied. 17,000 feet. The I-52 rests right below us. The experiment was simple, in theory. A low-frequency sonar pulse, custom-built to mimic the I-52's last transmission. If the ocean could replay sound, then maybe it could also respond. At 2200 hours, Hensley gave the order. "Send the signal." The ship's hull vibrated as the transducer fired. A deep, thunderous pulse shot into the black water, a sound that seemed to bend the air itself. The crew waited. 5 seconds. 10, 30, nothing. Then, a faint echo. "Reflection from the ridge?" one technician asked. Hensley shook his head. "No. It's coming from below." The room went dead quiet. The echo grew stronger, not just reflecting, replying. Tap, 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 tap. Tanaka's blood ran cold. It was the same rhythm, like the same voice of the deep. Hensley leaned forward, eyes wide. "Good God, it's answering." They sent another pulse, this time encoded with a simple question in Morse. "D try 2, are you there?" Reply. The ocean took its time. The seconds stretched like hours. Then the hydrophones crackled again. DE-I-52, returning. The room exploded in shouts. One of the crewmen crossed himself, another just stared, whispering, "No way, it's been 10 years. Tanaka said nothing. He just listened. And beneath that message, he heard something no one else seemed to notice. A faint murmur, almost like breathing. Over the next hours, the Trieste II recorded hundreds of pulses. Every time they transmitted, the ocean replied. But each reply grew stranger. Sometimes the signal came before they transmitted, as if anticipating them. Sometimes it carried fragments of speech, half Japanese, half English, like memories bleeding through time. And then came the sound no one could explain, a deep metallic groan like a massive door opening somewhere in the dark. The instruments spiked, lights flickered. For a moment, the ship itself seemed to hum with the same frequency. "Cut transmission!" Hensley shouted. "Shut it down now!" But it was too late. The sea had already answered. By morning, the ocean was calm again. But the sonar log showed one final reading, a return ping not from below, but from beneath the wreck. A second signal, different frequency, unknown source. Tanaka stared at the data. "That's not I-52, Hensley turned. "Then what is it?" Tanaka didn't answer. He just whispered, "Something deeper." By the third day, the Trieste II was no longer a research vessel. It was a floating nerve, tuned entirely to the voice of the deep. No one slept. The crew rotated shifts, staring at the sonar screens as if afraid to blink. Every few hours, the unknown frequency returned. Never loud, never clear, but always there. It pulsed like a heartbeat under the ship. Sometimes slow, sometimes fast, like it was breathing. Dr. Hensley grew obsessed. He started calling it the abyssal signal. He logged every transmission, every echo, and at night, he'd listen alone in the sonar cabin, eyes wide, hands trembling. Tanaka warned him, "You shouldn't listen too long. It changes you." Hensley laughed softly. "You think it's a ghost? It's physics, Tanaka. Pressure and sound, that's all." "No," Tanaka replied. "It's memory." That night, the signal came again, but this time it wasn't alone. The primary frequency split into two, one pulsing rhythmically and another deeper tone below it, almost like a reply within a reply. Tanaka leaned in. "What's that second layer?" A technician turned pale. "Sir, it's not Morse, it's speech." Hensley boosted the gain, the cabin filled with a low, distorted murmur, then through the static, a phrase, soft, broken, Japanese. Too deep, too deep. Everyone froze. Tanaka's throat tightened. That's what my brother said in his last message. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Every gauge on the console spiked at once. A low vibration rolled through the hull, a sound so deep it rattled bones. The entire ship seemed to hum in harmony with the ocean. Metal strained, bolts groaned. "Shut it down!" Hensley shouted. "Cut all transmitters!" The technician hit the switch, but the sound didn't stop. The ship was no longer transmitting. It was receiving. The speakers roared with noise. Not random static, structured tones like words being forced through water. Voices layered on voices, men crying out, metal collapsing, and beneath it all a constant rhythmic beat like a pulse. Tanaka grabbed his ears, eyes wide. "It's them! It's the crew!" Hensley stumbled backward. "No, that's not human." The frequency kept climbing higher, faster, until every instrument on board screamed in feedback. Then, silence. All power cut. The ship went dark. Only the ocean remained. When the lights came back, the recording systems were dead. Reels melted, data corrupted. No trace of what they'd heard remained. Except for one thing, a fresh signal, still echoing faintly through the hydrophones. It wasn't from the I-52. It came from several miles below the seabed, and it wasn't in any known frequency range. Tanaka stood at the edge of the deck that night, staring into the blackness below. "You heard it too," he whispered. "Didn't you?" The waves didn't answer, but deep beneath the surface, a faint light flickered. Golden, distant, like something alive, breathing. The abyss had listened, and now it wanted to be heard. The year was 1968. 2 decades had passed since the ocean swallowed the I-52 whole, but some ghosts just don't stay buried. Off the coast of Cape Verde aboard the research vessel Neptune's Grace, a team of American oceanographers and ex-Navy divers were preparing for something that wasn't supposed to exist. They'd picked up a sonar ping. Faint, repetitive, almost intentional. "Could be an echo from the seabed," one of the technicians said, frowning at the monitor. But Captain Dean Miller, a veteran of the Atlantic convoys, didn't buy it. "No echo repeats every 62 seconds, he muttered, lighting his cigarette. "That's a goddamn heartbeat." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Out here in the black waters of the mid-Atlantic, there were no storms tonight, but the air felt heavy, charged like before lightning strikes. At 2300 hours, the divers prepped the ROV, a clunky, early-era submersible fitted with 2 cameras and a pair of mechanical arms. Its descent lights cut through the water, illuminating the darkness like a glowing tear falling into infinity. The comms officer adjusted his headset. ROV at 200 meters, 400, 800. The deeper it went, the quieter everything became, until the only sound left on deck was the low hum of the ocean and the nervous breathing of men who'd seen too much war to believe in peace. At 3,200 meters, they saw it. A shape, dark and massive, half buried in the seabed, metallic ribs sticking out like bones. Barnacles covered what used to be the proud hull of the Japanese submarine I-52. The gold, the bodies, the secrets, all there, frozen in time. "Holy hell," one of the young techs whispered. The camera panned slowly across the wreck. A torn insignia could still be seen, the rising sun flag, faded but still defiant against the cold abyss. And then the ping came again. Ping, but this time it wasn't from their sonar, it was from the wreck itself. "Say again?" the operator asked, leaning closer. "Is that our own return?" Captain Miller shook his head, eyes narrowing. "No, son, that's something down there talking back." A sudden distortion cut through the feed, static, followed by a low rumble like metal grinding against metal. Then a voice. Barely audible, Japanese, fragmented, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Haiwa watashi oboete, the sea remembers us." The deck went silent. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Miller exhaled slowly, the cigarette trembling between his fingers. "Cut the feed," he ordered. "Now." But the ROV didn't respond. Its controls froze, the signal crackled, and on the screen, the camera turned slowly, on its own, toward the submarine's open hatch. From inside, the faintest flicker of light pulsed. Once, twice, like a heartbeat. Then everything went dark. The storm came without warning. A sudden roar of wind slammed across Neptune's Grace, tearing through ropes and shaking the antennas like angry whips. The ROV line went taut, then snapped with a violent crack. "Jesus Christ!" someone shouted. "We lost the feed!" Captain Miller's voice cut through the chaos. "Lock down the deck! Retrieve what's left of the tether." For the next hour, men fought against the sea, against something older and stronger than all of them combined. The Atlantic was no battlefield tonight. It was a grave, and it was reminding them who ruled it. When the storm finally eased, the crew gathered inside the comms room, drenched and pale. The radio was still hissing with static, but buried within the noise, something was whispering. It was faint, distorted, metallic. I-52. They stared at each other. Nobody spoke. Then the engineer, a quiet man named Franklin, began recording the sound. He slowed it down, filtered the interference, and there it was again, a human voice. Calm, almost serene. Haiwa thustachio boiteimasu. The sea remembers us. Franklin swallowed hard. That's Japanese, right? Miller nodded slowly. Yeah, and whoever said it's been dead for 24 years. They replayed the transmission a dozen times, each pass twisting their nerves tighter. Sometimes, underneath the words, they thought they could hear something else, like tapping on metal or the creak of a hatch. At 3:47, another signal came through, this time clear, electronic, rhythmic. It wasn't a distress call, it was coordinates. Latitude, longitude, depth, and below that, a single word in English. Listen, is this a hoax? One of the younger scientists muttered. Miller didn't answer. He just stared at the paper, the numbers etched into it like a curse. They checked the coordinates. It was the exact spot of the I-52 wreck. The same depth, the same silence. The captain finally spoke, his voice rough. Pack it up, we're leaving this sector at dawn. But Franklin couldn't let it go. He stayed in the comms room long after everyone else had gone to their bunks, headphones still on, staring at the signal monitor. And around 4:12, the whisper came back. Only this time, it wasn't Japanese. It was English. A man's voice, deep, old, filled with static and grief. If you find this, tell them we were not alone down here. Franklin froze. His hand hovered over the recorder. Repeat, please, he whispered. But the voice didn't repeat. Instead, a deep hum began to rise from the speakers, a sound so low it shook the walls, a vibration that seemed to come from the bones of the ship itself. The lights flickered. Every radio on board screamed with feedback. Then silence. When the others rushed back in, Franklin was staring blankly at the dead screen, his headset still on. Miller grabbed his shoulder. What the hell happened? Franklin's lips trembled. They're still down there, he whispered. And they're trying to talk to us. Tokyo, 1969. A cold rain poured over the rooftops as Captain Dean Miller stepped out of a black sedan, clutching a weathered tape recorder in his hand. The American Embassy had arranged a discreet meeting with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Not in an office, not in a base, but in a quiet university lab known for acoustic anomaly research. Inside, the air smelled like dust and electricity. 3 men waited by a reel-to-reel machine. Professor Hideo Tanaka, an expert in underwater acoustics, Commander Sato, ex-Imperial Navy, and a young translator who looked barely old enough to remember the war. Miller placed the tape on the table. This, he said quietly, was recorded 12 days ago, 4,000 meters under the Atlantic. Tanaka adjusted his glasses. From a wreck? Miller nodded. From your wreck. The I-52. Silence. The professor glanced at Sato, whose face went pale. Then he pressed play. The room filled with static. Then that faint, rhythmic hum began again, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Then came the voice. At first, it was unmistakably human. Japanese, repeating that haunting line, Haiwa watashitachi o koeteimasu. The sea remembers us. But as the recording went on, the voice began to stretch, each word bending, warping, splitting until it sounded like dozens of voices whispering in unison, rising and falling like waves. Tanaka turned white. He quickly stopped the tape. That isn't possible, he stammered. Miller leaned forward. It's what, Professor? Tanaka exhaled. It's not a single speaker. The frequencies overlap in a way no human throat can produce. It's as if multiple sources are speaking the same phrase at different depths. Sato crossed his arms, uneasy. Could it be a malfunction? Tanaka shook his head. No, there's intentional modulation here. Someone or something wanted to be heard. Miller stared at the reel, the sound still echoing in his head. He'd been in the Navy long enough to know fear, but this wasn't fear. It was recognition. Then the professor said something that made everyone freeze. These harmonics, I've seen them before. During the war, our sonar picked up similar anomalies off the coast of Truk Lagoon, but we assumed it was interference. He paused, eyes distant. Now I'm not so sure. The translator hesitated, then asked, Professor, if it's not human, what could it be? Tanaka looked down. The ocean doesn't forget, young man, he murmured. Sometimes it tries to remember through us. He turned back to Miller. Captain, did your team ever retrieve the ROV that recorded this? Miller's face tightened. No, it went offline right after the signal. We lost it. Tanaka exchanged a worried look with Sato. Then maybe, he whispered, it didn't want to come back. The tape began to hiss again, even though no one had touched it. A faint pulse glowed on the reel, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat under the plastic. Miller reached forward, but Tanaka grabbed his wrist. Don't, he said sharply. It's still transmitting. The words hung in the cabin like a curse. Captain Miller's hand froze over the recorder. The static throbbed through the speakers, a low, pulsing heartbeat that seemed to come from the ocean itself, not just the wreck, not just the water around them, but from deep below, from the very floor of the Atlantic. Tanaka leaned closer, voice barely audible. The sea, it doesn't stop. It remembers everything. The room went silent except for the pulse. Even the technicians who'd spent their lives chasing signals felt it now, that presence, something ancient, patient, and endless. Miller swallowed hard. How long? How long has it been down there? Tanaka shook his head. Since 1944, 17,000 feet, sealed by pressure but alive in memory. Every sound it made, every life it swallowed is still here, encoded in the water, in the metal. The lights flickered. The reel-to-reel machine hummed as if straining against an invisible current, and then, faintly, beneath the static, they heard it, a chorus of voices. Broken, fragmented, human, yet impossibly layered. Japanese, English, shouts, whispers, metallic creaks, and through it all, the same words repeated over and over, the sea remembers us. Miller felt a cold sweat on his back. He reached for the power switch. Tanaka grabbed his arm. Don't. It's already too late. They watched as the tape pulsed on its own, the reel spinning even though no machine was driving it. The sound wrapped around them, vibrating the hull, creeping into their bones. One of the young scientists whispered, voice trembling, Captain, it's alive. Not them. Not people. Something else. Miller said nothing. He could feel the ocean watching, listening, keeping its secrets. Hours passed. The crew tried to record, to analyze, to rationalize. Everything failed. Every instrument melted, every tape corrupted. The only thing left was the pulse, the rhythm, the memory of 17,000 feet of cold, crushing darkness. And then, silence. Not the kind of silence that signals peace. The kind of silence that waits. The kind that buries you along with the truth. Miller looked over the edge of the deck at the black waves. The sea, he whispered. Tanaka nodded slowly. Keeps everything it takes. Far below, the wreck of I-52 lay hidden. The gold, the lives, the secrets, all swallowed by pressure, darkness, and time. And still, in the deep, faintly, a pulse waited. The ocean's memory, the abyss's voice. No one would hear it again. No one would understand it. It was theirs now. The seas. And with that, the Neptune's grace turned for home. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, black and silent, but somewhere beneath the waves the I-52 whispered and the ocean listened. If you're still here with us, all the way to the very end, thank you. You haven't just followed a sunken submarine or uncovered secrets from the deep. You felt the fear, the mystery, and the tragedy that the ocean has been holding for decades. The one lesson this story leaves us: sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Even if the sea tries to swallow it whole, memory, courage, and curiosity are what keep it alive. So stay curious, stay aware, but beware. Some secrets are meant to stay beneath the waves.